You're listening to E-Commerce Fastlane, the podcast show to help you build, manage, grow, and scale a successful and thriving company, powered by Shopify. Listen to real conversations with partners and subject matter experts as they share proven practical strategies, platforms, and the best Shopify apps to help you accelerate your business. The time is now for you to improve efficiencies, grow revenue, profit, and lifetime customer loyalty. Please welcome your host, startup founder, and strategic advisor, Steve Hutt.
Welcome back to another episode of E-Commerce Fastlane. I'm your host, Steve Hutt. Now, today my guest is Melissa Coventry. She's the VP of Operations at Rose Skin Co. Now, Melissa is a supply chain and operation executive, really with a remarkable talent for aligning people, processes, and systems really to create a strategic edge for rapidly growing companies. And her career journey really has been marked by diverse experiences. I kind of went onto her LinkedIn profile before recording today. And really, it's all about scaling companies across various industries. She brings a very unique blend of kind of analytical skills, problem-solving skills, and creativity to a lot of the operational challenges that can happen with a scaling D2C brand. Now, at Rose Skin Co., it really is a leading beauty and skincare brand. Melissa has been very instrumental in driving operational excellence and fostering a culture of innovation in the company. And they've been making waves in the beauty industry with a cutting edge kind of at-home beauty devices and skincare products, really offering consumers professional grade treatments, but in the comfort of their own home. Now, today's episode, Melissa, I kind of pre-planned some questions for today because I really would love if she could share some insights on aligning these people and these processes and systems, but really just to close kind of these operational gaps that can happen and really set companies up for success and growing and scaling their operations. So I'm really excited, though, for this conversation. It's a very unique conversation. Typically, I like to focus more on the tactics around the marketing strategy, apps and platforms and things like that. This is going to be a very unique perspective from someone who really understands the operations of an e-commerce business. And I know from what I read, she firmly believes that, operations are where the revenue is realized. And I'm eager to really hear her thoughts on that and how we can all learn. So hi, Melissa. Welcome to E-Commerce Fastlane.
Hi, Steve. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and to be able to offer a different operational viewpoint for all of the E-Commerce Fastlane listeners.
Now, to kick things off, what initially drew you to the e-commerce industry?
I think it's probably the adrenaline rush. E-commerce is so exciting because it's constantly changing and it's never the same one day to the next. So I'm probably also a little bit of a glutton for punishment.
Now, you've mentioned that aligning people, systems, and processes really is crucial for a scaling business. So can you walk us through your approach to, I guess, in a few areas? One, identifying where things are getting stuck in an organization, and then how you go about improving it.
Okay, so that's actually really a big question. Honestly, the first place most people look is KPIs. But one of the challenges with supply chain is that KPIs are very linked, which means you often have to look across an entire supply chain and not just one area. And it's one of the things I say in every company I work in. There's a reason why we call supply chain a chain. It's not a channel, it's a chain. Everything's linked together. And so one of the challenges you often get is, trying to understand the difference between what is actually happening within the chain versus what people think is happening in the chain. It's often really two different things. You have to talk about both of them because there's often a lot of misunderstandings as you're working through an entire chain that's linked together. And to really find out what's happening, you always have to talk to the people who are actually doing the work to be able to find the truth. And it's incredibly important to have those conversations. I have found so many times that if I come into an organization and they're asking me to jump on a problem immediately, where, I'll start to dig in. And what I find out is what leadership thinks is happening versus what is actually happening often are two different things. So it's really important when you're identifying the root problems to not use assumptions, but to use actual data that you gather from the people who are actually doing the work. And so Again, in supply chain, it's challenging because everything is linked together. And so when you're trying to address the underlying root problems, you really do have to think across the entire chain rather than just inside one department, because it's often the interactions within the supply chain where things are slipping through the cracks. And that's kind of what I do. Like, as a strategic operations person, I'm someone who comes in and does my best to fill in those cracks where the processes, the systems, the people are misaligned. And it's because I can't tell you, it's really incredible how much of inefficiency is in those cracks. And inefficiency in operations means money. So you just have money falling in through those cracks. To give you an example, there's a really funny story that Jeff Bezos tells when he was starting out Amazon. And when they were starting, they would pick and pack themselves. So they're crawling around on the floor, like picking and packing the packages that are going out to the customers. And he turned one day to the people he was working with and he said, we seriously need to get some knee pads. And the guy said to him, no, we seriously need to get some packing tables. And that's really kind of the underlying challenge when you're looking at root cause identification and how are you going to fix it? Because a lot of times when people are looking at the root cause identification, they're looking at the symptoms they got. They have these sore knees because they're crawling around on the floor. We need knee pads. But the underlying disease is the fact that you're crawling around on the floor, right? And that's where you really need to change things. And that's why you really need to get packing tables. And you need to look at it at a whole different way. The other story I was going to tell before I told you that one was I worked at one company and there were, I was walking through the warehouse and there were pallets on the warehouse floor that just flat out shouldn't have existed. And it's actually a really long story. So to make it short, by the time I had tracked down why those pallets ever existed, I found so many inefficiencies in the system and so many cracks where things weren't happening the way people thought they were. And it started all the way with sales pre-orders coming into the system, all the way through fulfillment, all the way through to customer payment. And that new system had been put into place about 3 months before. And by the time I finished following the bouncing ball through our operations, I found over $5 million in problems just from identifying, hey, those pallets shouldn't exist there. And so the thing I always say to people when you're really doing the root cause is you've got to get curious, you've got to ask questions, and you've got to talk to the front line all the way across the system. And that's kind of like the bottom line. The other issue you have specifically, I think, generally, and probably just scaling across, my finance people and marketing people would say, no, it's all the way across. It's the question of that, what I had said before about that story of, are you going to do knee pads or are you going to do packing tables? Are we going to continue to do what we're doing right now and maybe just make it a little more comfortable, that knee pad solution? Or are we actually going to change what we're doing and really work at becoming more efficient, which is that packing table solution? And one of the challenges you have as an operational leader is oftentimes we're the last ones to get money. And sometimes things have to be going really wrong before, we can actually get the financing that we need. And I am not complaining. I definitely want to say I'm not complaining because I get it. I mean, I get finance. Like, we absolutely positively need to know and understand where money is coming in and money is going out. And at the same time, marketing, like, if we don't understand our funnel, we don't have customers. Why do we even exist? Right. So lots of times that's where money and time needs to go first. And sometimes operation is a lower priority. And so in the end, sometimes we do a lot more of what's comfortable than necessarily moving over to efficiency. And that's where we get into maybe being more reactionary, like things have started to really go wrong. So now you're talking about investing in an ERP. And then you start really talking about investing in your operational foundations. So the challenge around all of this is in not just identification of it being a chain and having to look across the whole thing, is what kind of money, time, and people do you have to invest in your solutions?
Now, in your experience, how do you determine which resource, money, people, or time, is the limiting factor in a company's growth? And then how do you go and address that constraint?
Actually, that's one of the easier questions, because if you are a company that's growing pretty much between 0 to 300 million, the constraint is always all three. Like, we never have enough of any one of those resources in a scaling startup. That's a really rough thing to say, but it's also really, really true. There's not enough money. There's not enough people. There's not enough time. It's actually one of the basic conversations I often have with other leaders that come into a scaling startup that are coming from large organizations, is that very conversation that they need to be prepared that they won't have enough money, they won't have enough people, and they definitely won't have enough time. So the real question is, how do you start to address that constraint? And the challenge you have is when you're in a hockey stick growth, is that just as a member of, your hockey stick growth, you're in leadership and you're trying to balance everything. And that's the real challenge, is you're trying to balance all three of those. And sometimes you can't get all three. And it's just the bottom line. Like, let's say something's going viral. Money needs to go to marketing, right? That funnel needs to be fed. And why wouldn't you? Things are going viral, right? And customer service. Suddenly they're getting hit with more tickets, more questions. People are reaching out to them a lot more because this has gone viral. So, and those customers, they need an answer, in operations, maybe we're trying to keep up with demand. Like, I have definitely been in the place where we have spent X number of dollars on inventory and then sold that whole inventory in 1 week when we thought it was going to be 6 to 8 weeks of inventory, so now we're struggling with money, people, and time. Like, that's just the challenge of growing. So addressing this is exactly why sometimes we end up with that knee pad solution instead of the packing table solution, because sometimes you don't have the money to invest in the real efficiency gain. And sometimes you just have to put some knee pads on just to make it a little bit easier. I often find this because, we often have that idea of move fast and break things in scaling startups. And we definitely break things. We definitely break things and we definitely move fast. But there absolutely always comes a point where you have to stop and sharpen that axe. You need to have a roadmap. It needs to be written out. It needs to be visible to people. Like, don't just have it in your mind. Absolutely get it out there so that people can see it and react to it. And I do have a couple of ways to do that. But one of the ones that I found that kind of clears the road the fastest is when I start looking at projects and I do like an expense value graphing. So, I take each project and I say, what's the cost of this going to be and what's the value we're going to get out of it? And you get into your 4 quadrants, right? You've got stuff that's in the lower cost with a low value. And that's your someday list, right? If someone has a slow week, sure, go ahead and work on that because it's a low cost. But it's really not going to be a big mover. If you have something that's a low cost, but it's going to really do a change and really move that needle, absolutely, just get it done this month. Are you kidding me? Like, that's your no-brainer list, right? If you have a high cost and a low value, that's probably never happening in a scaling startup. Like, to be really honest, that's a pit of despair that's just not going to get answered. There's no reason for it. Who's going to spend that money to get nothing out of it? But it is a place that you have to watch out for, because sometimes it becomes something that a founder is focusing on, and you have to show them that that's not really going to be the way that's going to move the needle. High cost and high value. This is where all of the action happens. You got to prepare yourself for the debates, right? Because this is where all of the prioritizations and the needs of the company are going to be argued. And that's where you as a leader really have to sit down and say, where is it that we're going to get our highest value at our lowest cost? Or what is the one that is maybe not the highest value today, but will be in 3 months or 4 months? Like, we need to plan for this now so that we don't collapse and fall apart later. So that's one of the ways in which I kind of address looking at different constraints and how is it that we should spend those money, people, or time. Because to be honest, when you're growing, every single one of those is a limiting factor.
You kind of emphasize a bit about the importance of building strong foundations. So can you give us an example of how investing in proper infrastructure early on has paid off for a company that you've worked with?
I think the challenge is that because of the size of the companies I work in, most of the times, they're under 500 million. And the challenge you get around that is that there's a lot of duct tape and baling wire. And the reality is that duct tape and baling wire isn't going to get you to where you want to go. You constantly do have to think about what is the foundation that you need to build. And the way in which it happens, though, like the real way in which it happens in a company is often done in a reactionary manner, that things are just gotten to the point where we're spending so much money fixing things that shouldn't have gone wrong in the first place, that's when you start to get the money for something like, let's say, an ERP, which is very expensive. Like, again, that is a real investment that you really have to think about what kind of ROI you're going to get out of it. And lots of times when I'm trying to set up foundations within operations, it's not necessarily going to be a systems answer. It's going to be a process answer or a people answer, because that investment into systems is so expensive in operations. You do kind of cobble things together a little bit with different apps to kind of help you out. But there does come a point that, like I said before, where you really need to stop and create the roadmap to success. And I want to tell you that it happens early and it'll pay off. But honestly, majority of the time, money is going to end up going to bringing customers in the door rather than it going to answering an operational problem on the back end.
I certainly would agree that delegation is a critical skill for leaders to scale up their businesses. And so what strategies have you found most effective in delegating tasks and responsibilities?
This is one of the big challenges I think you see, especially when you're working in companies that are like under 50 million. You've got founders and leaders that have way too many hats on and they need to shift work off their plates. And the challenge around it is that, remember when we were talking about money, people, and time, and we don't have enough of those? Well, it's true. Again, when you're trying to shove it off your plate, you don't have enough people often to always take it. So then you hear yourself saying to yourself, you know what, it'll just be faster if I do it myself. And if you start saying that to yourself, I want you to smack yourself and say, stop it. Because what ends up happening here is that you're spending all your time doing stuff that's not moving the needle in the company forward. And that's when you start to see your company stagnate. It's because you aren't developing within the company or yourself what needs to happen to move that company forward. So one of the strategies I find really effective for me is to stop and look at the things on my plate and do this like at least once a quarter, where you say, what is on my plate that's possible for someone else to do? What are the things that I can teach someone, like in the next week? Can I teach someone these 3 tasks and then get it off my plate so that I'm no longer doing it? If you can, absolutely do it and take the time to teach someone to do those tasks so that it's no longer there. When I look at my plate, what I want to see is, am I doing my secret sauce? Am I doing what is really the stuff that I know that I specifically do that adds value to the company, that adds profitability, that moves our revenue? Like, I can't do all of the things. I am limited in my own personal time. I can't do everything. So I need to focus in on what's my strengths and what I do personally that moves the needle. And if you're seeing stuff on your plate that is all secret sauce, then you're going to have to find someone like you to help share that plate if that plate's overfull. But sometimes when you look at that and you're looking at the plate and you know that there's things on it that really do move the needle for the company, but maybe isn't really part of your secret sauce, that's something where you need to hire in and bring someone else in that really excels in that area, because you might be good at it. You might be getting it done right now, but maybe that's something also you need to move on. So the strategy is really to focus in at least once a quarter on what is it that's on my plate and move things that aren't. And then comes the question around, how do you not take it back? And that one's brutal. That one's brutal, because what I see in companies often is when you start to shift things off of your plate, you're also shifting power in decision making to other people. And that can be very scary, especially when you are someone who is an early person within a company, because you've been there forever. You have so much institutional knowledge that you know pretty much how to do absolutely everything. And you're incredibly valuable to the company. And sometimes people worry that they'll lose their value, but you don't. I just want to tell you guys, you're not going to lose your value. You're still really valuable to the company. And what you don't want to do, especially if you are someone that is in a more junior position, is get stuck in that position because you're the only one who knows how to do it. So while all of this is uncomfortable because people are going to do things in a different way from what you do, you need to just let it go and do not take it back. Whatever you do, please don't take it back, because that way lies madness. So please don't.
Now, on the same topic around building a team, like how do you find the right people that are, I guess, willing and able to adapt to the various stages of a scaling company? And like what qualities do you look for when hiring key positions kind of in a rapidly growing business?
You know, that actually is a really good question, because there are a lot of things that you need to think about when you're in a rapidly growing company, and you need to think about your company in what stage it's growing. So one of the challenges is finding the right people that can move through the scaling that you're doing. And you don't necessarily want to pick someone who maybe has done scaling, but maybe did it from, like, I talked to someone and they had done scaling for a company from 900 million to about 2.2 billion. And that is absolutely someone who has moved through scaling. It just, at the time, the company was looking at roughly 75 million to 200 million scaling. Those are two very, very different scaling spaces. So one of the challenges you get as you're a growing company is after you get to a certain size and a certain dollar amount, you really do start to attract people from larger companies. And you need to really ask them a lot of questions about whether or not they understand what it means to move through scaling and not just know what it looks like to operate at scale. If you have the right person coming from those larger companies, they can offer you an incredible benefit within the company as long as they really understand what they are getting into. So a lot of questions I asked during that time is, where did they scale? How did they scale? What did their previous job descriptions look like through that scaling? Because what you need to often understand if you're looking at that kind of below 200 million part is that your job description is not narrow in those companies. You've got to have a wide scope to be successful. And one of the challenges you get as you work in larger companies is that your scope becomes more and more narrow. I call them needles because they have such a depth of knowledge within their scope. It's like absolutely incredible. But sometimes if you bring them into a smaller scaling company, especially if you're down in the 30 to 50 to 75 million size, sometimes it's hard for them because they're used to having a team to support them. And remember that whole conversation about money, people, time, and you don't have any. That's really true. So, you need to make sure you're looking for qualities in those people that they're super curious, that they want to dig in, that they're comfortable in failing, that they're comfortable in, going it alone. And honestly, these are qualities that you need across the board when you're looking at a rapidly growing company, that they need to be comfortable calling and making decisions on their own, on the fly, with very little information. They need to be very, very transparent. They need to be really comfortable with throwing it out there. For operations, we have so much of a background in continuous improvement, and the idea that you throw your scrap and your failures in front of everyone so that you can talk through them and make it better. You need that same kind of attitude for whatever position you're hiring within a rapidly growing company, because people need to have that open communication to be able to successfully scale quickly.
Now, you've stressed the importance of company culture when promoting transparency and collaboration and creativity in a business. Can you share any specific initiatives or practices that you've implemented really to foster this sort of culture?
I think this is really important because company culture is very real. And if you want to promote one that has transparency, collaboration, and creativity, then you have to demonstrate it from the top down, and you have to be intentional about establishing it. Ways in which I've done it in the past is to embody it. I always let my team know, look, tell me when I do something wrong. Don't let me do something stupid because I think something's going one way and it's actually going the others. Like, absolutely stop and correct me if I am wrong. And I think they don't really believe you at the first time, but usually someone initially takes the step forward and it has the bravery to say something to me. And when I respond well, when I say, thank you so much for telling me that, like if I had made that decision, I would have made the wrong decision because I didn't know that piece of information. I really appreciate you telling me that. Like, you have to embody it and demonstrate it, that you are going to be transparent and collaborative. And it's important for people to feel that security, that they know that they can be vulnerable in the workplace and that they're going to be supported. I have a lot of people tell me that I seem to support inclusion and equity a lot in my teams. And I think this is all part of that transparency, collaboration, and creativity. If any one of your team members doesn't feel like they're being supported, or doesn't feel like they're being included, or doesn't feel like they're being treated equally, you are going to struggle with your growth because you're not giving them the support that they need to be able to foster a culture of transparency, collaboration, and creativity. And so I think it's really important for everyone to understand why they're at the company, why they're important to the company, how I'm going to support them in the company. And you need to do this from, like I said, the top down. Everyone in the company, especially up at the top, needs to keep supporting this and reinforcing this all the way through. And you can do practices where you have team meetings and team building and everything. But what I think really matters is, what does the day-to-day meeting look like in the company? Are you supporting people, or are you having meetings after the meeting? What I mean is that, people are in a meeting thinking that decisions are being made and that we're moving in one direction, but actually the real work is getting done in a second meeting that only maybe 2 or 3 people are in. That's the kind of stuff that doesn't foster that alignment within people, process, and systems. And so it's really important from all the way to the top, all the way to the bottom, that people know that we continually demonstrate the company culture, that they're not just words on a wall.
You made a very bold statement that, and I mentioned at the top of the show here, that operations really is where the revenue is realized. And so can you elaborate a bit on that perspective and then how it influences your approach to operational strategy?
You wouldn't think that would be such a controversial statement, but it's true. Like, I've upset people with that statement. So I'm going to go ahead and be fully controversial here. The challenge we have with operations being where revenue is realized, and not always necessarily wanting to believe that, is a lot of times we talk about growth marketing, we talk about revenue growth, we talk about sales, we talk about e-commerce, and we don't actually address how operations is realizing the revenue. The bottom line is, if operations doesn't have that product in the warehouse, you can sell it all you want, but we're not getting the money in the bank account. So you can say that, there was the potential of revenue, but the revenue is not going to enter our actual bank account. And so this is why it's so important for operations to be well-funded. While we often, because even just the personality types of operations, we make do with what we have. We're usually really, really good at problem solving. We can use a lot of duct tape and baling wire to get us into a place. But this is actually one of the bold statements that I use to help get those foundations and the money, people, and time that I need to be able to advance operations. Because there is nothing worse than telling, sales, we can't fulfill that order. Like, I know it happens, like, product goes viral, and that's so exciting and it's thrilling and it's hard as an operations person to know that we never expected that to go viral, but now it has, and it's wonderful. But then it goes out of stock, and then you can't fulfill. And then you're facing the fact that there were dollars on the table that you can't get. And this is why operations is where revenue is realized. And it is one of the things that I use to influence the founders and CEOs, because, like I said, there's nothing more frustrating than to say, we're not going to get that because we didn't have the foundations, we didn't have the money, we didn't have the people, we didn't have the time, we didn't have the product in place to be able to support all of that hard work that marketing and sales has done.
Another interesting concept that I think myself and my listeners would love to learn more from you is around these sales and operations planning. I think it's S&OP, it's kind of referred to as. And why do you consider it a valuable tool for e-commerce businesses?
Okay, so S&OP planning, it's really important. Look, you definitely should be doing it. And part of it is because of what we talked about, sales are putting numbers on paper until operations delivers. So you need to have that connection between sales and operations, and you need to have them aligned to be able to successfully get revenue into the company. Like a high level definition of S&OP is to essentially operationalize the strategy of a company. Like it is where you create a process that really connects your company's strategy to its operational implementation. And you connect it across the departments because you have multiple departments coming into this planning meeting to sit and to really discuss what is it that we're going to do? How are we going to make this strategy of the company real? What's the framework we're going to do? And how are we going to implement it? And that's why it's really important, because otherwise that alignment of people, processes, and systems doesn't really happen if you don't actively align people, which seems like an interesting concept that I talk about in companies a lot, which is we actually need to actively align people. And it can't just be one person going from department to department, aligning them. Because as I say, I can't scale one person. Like we need people to come in together and have a conversation around what sales and operations planning is going to look like. And the reason why it's really valuable is, in general, a sales and operations process that is successful really decreases scrap and it increases profitability. That's the bottom line of why it's a valuable tool. But what it also how it helps you get there is that it helps you make data-informed decisions so that all the people in the room are hearing the same data. There's that feedback loop to all of the people in the room hearing the same data. It helps us in leadership think about the strategies that we've got and how can we align that to the plan and the implementation of those plans within our different business units. It helps us focus our resources, people, money, time. As I've said repeatedly, they're usually very limited, even when you're rapidly scaling. As much money as you see coming in the front door is often also leaving. So, being able to focus those resources is really important. It helps you as a team identify the opportunities that you have for growth within a company. And it also helps you identify the potential risks. So, whenever you're launching a product, you have to think about what happens if this product fails? What happens if this product goes viral? What happens if this product is just meh, And so having a process in place where everyone's getting together, usually it's once a month, where you can think about all of these things is really important. It usually leads to increases in forecast accuracy, which saves companies a lot of money. It decreases your out of stocks, which again, no one ever wants to talk about out of stocks, but they're real. You can often identify cost savings. You can optimize your product. You can optimize your inventory. You can do SKU rationalization. You can look for manufacturing synergies. It's an incredibly valuable process that I highly recommend everyone participate in. But again, you have to have the right culture for it to be successful. You really do need that transparent, open, collaborative culture if you really want this to work well. And when it really works well, it really does a lot of those goals that you're trying to achieve to get to that profitability that you want in your company.
Now, what role does data analytics play in your approach to operations? How do you ensure that maybe data-driven insights are effectively kind of translated into actionable strategies?
Data analytics is a huge part of my approach to operations. I am very data informed, and especially if I'm working on anything big and you start to ask me questions, you will see that I have run more than enough scenarios to answer any questions that you have and that I've done my research. I think that for you to make sure that data-driven insights are effectively translated into actionable strategies, for you to be able to do that, you need to understand the stories behind the data. And that's something I'm very passionate about, because the reality is we can put a lot of KPIs out there and you can't manage to KPIs unless you understand what's driving those KPIs. If you look at on time and in full and you're seeing it change, you need to understand why your on time in full is changing. Like, what are the decisions that created either the answer you wanted to see or the answer you didn't want to see? So data is very, very important. Clean data is very important. Master data management is very important. And truly understanding what's behind it is also really important, because your KPIs can be easily manipulated, especially by someone who knows data. So to give you an example, I saw a KPI of a demand accuracy, and it was like over 90%. And I was like, that manufacturing timeline is too long for you to have that high of a KPI for a demand accuracy. And of course, what I end up finding out is, my first question is, what's the event horizon on that demand accuracy? And the answer was 1 week. And I said, that's not the KPI you should be displaying, because 1 week out, I hope that you're getting it right. That's not when you are making actionable decisions on your demand plan. If that particular manufacturing timeline was 4 months, if you are looking at your 4-month accuracy and your accuracy at planning your demand is, let's say, less than 60%, then you might as well flip a coin on what you're going to buy, right? Because, it's 50-50 whether or not you're going to be right, maybe even less if it's lower. And that's when you're making the actual decisions based on that demand plan. That's when you're putting things into manufacturing. So you need to understand, if there's one thing that you take away from this about data-driven insights and actionable strategies, it's please understand the story behind your KPIs, because otherwise your KPIs are just pretty numbers on a dashboard. Like, you don't truly understand what changes you need to make to actually manipulate and change those KPIs in the direction you want them to go. So one of the ways, the main way I ensure, is to make sure I know the story behind the data.
Well, Melissa, we are at the end of the show for today. So I do have one kind of final question about how you see the future of e-commerce operations evolving, like particularly with the incredible advancements that are happening right now in AI, in automation, and maybe even other emerging technologies that we don't even know of yet. I just love to have your lay of the land.
You're asking someone who has a background in machine learning, which is part of AI, whether or not they see AI as a good technology for the future. Yeah, of course I do. That's why I studied it and why I have utilized it in my past companies. The challenge, I think, is that you cannot blindly apply the latest technology to your company and think you're going to have successful results. Like, as a company, you need to have a strategy. You need to think about, how is it that this new technology is going to advance my goals of increasing my profitability, increasing my revenue, whatever it is. You have a goal that you're trying to achieve. You've got a strategy to do it. How does AI fit within that strategy? Don't just try to shoehorn it in because it's, the latest and greatest. It needs to be the latest and greatest for you. So what I would say is take it with a grain of salt. I see a lot of companies out there pushing machine learning and AI, but it maybe isn't really the best use case for you. So be very thoughtful in the way in which you're going to apply it to your company's strategy so that you actually do get that successful goal met of whatever it is that you're doing.
And what would you recommend the next steps for our listeners who would like to learn more about you and your continued career growth?
So if you want to reach out to me, it's absolutely the easiest to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I've sent that information to Steve so he can post it for you, but that's the best way to contact me is through LinkedIn.
Well, thanks, Melissa, for sharing your insights and your operational processes. It's been a very eye-opening and very educational episode. And I just want to thank you for taking your time, being so open and transparent to sharing today.
Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed being here. You know, we've answered a lot of questions and talking about kind of the theories around growing and scaling a company. And if any of the listeners had some further questions around this, please don't hesitate to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm honestly quite a data nerd, and I really enjoy talking about operations and supply chain and how to grow a company. And I don't mind answering questions and digging into the nitty-gritty with anyone. So don't hesitate to reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Well, that's it for today's episode. I'd like to thank you personally for being a loyal listener of E-commerce Fastlane. It's my hope that this podcast is offering you a ton of value through growth strategies, tactics, and exclusive insider tips on the best Shopify apps and marketing platforms, all with my personal goal to help you build, manage, grow, and scale a successful and thriving company powered by Shopify. Thanks for investing some time today and listening to the show. I'm so proud and excited that you have a growth mindset and are a constant learner. I truly appreciate you and your entrepreneurial journey. Enjoy the rest of the week and keep thriving with Shopify.